Welcome back. In a moment, we'll hear more from our guests on the situation in Gambia. But first, here are some other stories to keep an eye on. There has been continued violence in Brazil's prison system. 4 people have been killed in a prison in Manaus. Gang disputes over the drug trade is causing riots at prisons across the country. A cold weather front stretching across Europe has left a number of people dead and caused travel disruptions in cities as far south as Athens and Istanbul. Night temperatures in Russia dropped as low as minus 30 degrees. Several Greek islands were covered by snow. And the fast food giant McDonald's has agreed to sell 80% of its restaurants in China and Hong Kong as part of a plan to franchise more of its businesses worldwide. The sale is thought to be worth $2.1 billion. Now, let's return to our conversation about the Gambia, a small West African nation that's going through a leadership crisis. President Yahya Jammeh's rule should have come to an end after 22 years in power. He lost last year's election in a surprise outcome that saw the main opposition candidate, Adama Barrow, win the vote. President Jammeh is refusing to surrender power and has filed a legal challenge to the result. To discuss that further, I'm joined by Tamsanqa Jo, an Africa analyst, and James Bahoum, who's a Gambian activist in both politics and human rights. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. Tamsanqa, what do you think is the legitimacy of this claim by President Jammeh that last year's election was a big mistake?
Well, the Gambian electoral system is a very simple but complicated one. It is one that makes life difficult for any court of law that considers any complaint that comes before it to review the process. You're talking about marbles. You're talking about you don't have the ballot papers that could be presented as
little evidence, is there?
And I think Mamunjai's group, that is the Independent Electoral Commission, did not help themselves. They announced a result that Jammeh agreed with initially, and then came back 5 days later. Tens of thousands of votes disappeared from their roll. And then they came, initially he was losing by more than 50,000 votes. It's a small country, remember. And then when they revised the figures, they then said the difference was 14,000 votes, in which case he would have been, with the constituency that he's representing, said, he's not going to have faith in that system. What happened to the tens of thousands of votes? Initially, they should not have announced the results if they were not sure of those results. And then what he was demanding now is a system where he can cross-check to make sure that those votes, even the final ones that they announced, were legitimate. It's a difficult one. Flip it round, Martin. If it was the opposition complaining that they did not agree with a vote where tens of thousands of votes from what was initially announced disappeared, everyone would be saying they have a voice. But Jammeh is losing the political fight. You might win the legal fight, but politically he is digging a deeper political grave for himself.
If this is all very difficult, why not just rerun the election?
Because there's no guarantee that that election will be different. The situation on the ground has changed. There are so many ministers that are moving away from him. There are so many people who have left the country, including the head of the Independent Electoral Commission. There are other people in the army, in the navy, that are defecting and going to Dakar in Senegal. So the situation on the ground is no longer fertile for a scenario where you can have free, fair, and credible elections.
But James, we hear this morning the official news channels are saying the head of the army supports President Jammeh in his claim. Now, there's some dispute as to whether that support is actually just a regurgitated announcement from the year before, 2014 or something. But where do you think the allegiance of most of the military people in the Gambia lies right now?
What is that the majority of the armed forces are with Barrow. Most of them are actually saying that when it comes the 18th or 19th of December, when Yahya Jammeh's term expires, that they will then officially or visibly actually transfer allegiance to Adama Barrow, the elected president.
Right.
Now, of course, the statement of the Chief of Defense Force, Usman Sonko, is neither here nor there. This is the same man who only a couple of weeks earlier had pledged allegiance to the president-elect. Alongside the head of the...
Yeah, he's changed his mind as well.
He's
flip-flopped,
changed his mind. It's a lot of flip-flopping. But what is clear is that the vast majority of Gambians are in support of the president-elect, and officials, either of the state, the army, or any other state institution, are in a tight corner. They will have to make decisions sooner or later. And the decision that Gambians want them to make is to pledge allegiance to the people's choice, Mr. Adama Barrow. And I suspect that will become more apparent that most of the armed forces will be shifting their allegiance from Jammeh.
Isn't the Supreme Court, though, seen as an instrument of the Jammeh regime, that they're more likely, if there's a balance of probabilities here, to come down on his side?
Well, that is not also clear, you see. In fact, the Supreme Court, as you well know, has not been constituted for over 20 months. And that is one of Jammeh's machinations. It has now come back to haunt him. The reason why the Supreme Court was not empaneled was so that he could deny people the right to the last recourse in the country, which is the Supreme Court and the highest court of the state, of course. And that the fact that he did that, not realizing that he would be in a position where he would want the services of a Supreme Court, which is non-existent. So whether these judges, in fact, will be taking up appointment, and even if they do, whether the time frame that it requires them to be processed in order to empanel them would be sufficient to deny Mr. Barrow as inauguration on the 19th. So there's no clarity on that issue. And more people believe that the Supreme Court judges that were handpicked from Nigeria and Sierra Leone might not actually come to Gambia to hear this petition.
Okay, so the situation very fluid.
It is.
And the reaction from neighbours, I mean, Gambia almost embraced by Senegal, so, and other West African nations, what do they make of this? Do you think it's a bit like you were suggesting it's time for a changeover of power? The pendulum has swung away from President Jammeh.
It is very clear that there is political appetite in the Gambia, outside the Gambia, and the neighboring countries, ECOWAS in particular, the regional leadership, that there must be transition of some sort from President Yahya Jammeh to President-elect Barrow or any other government that might come after that. Here is the difficulty. The president of Senegal, Macky Sall, he is a new generation president. He will not want to have blood on his hands because any military intervention in the Gambia, small as it might be, will have devastating humanitarian consequences. And Senegal, being the only country that borders the Gambia, will have to be part of that solution. And they would not, Macky Sall would not want to be part of that. President Buhari of Nigeria, he is the man leading the mediation. He is the military man. He knows that Boko Haram in Nigeria is a scenario where the whole thing was not nipped in the bud, was not handled properly. He is not likely to go the military way. So it is likely that you might see the whole team being assembled together to have either a government of national unity or a scenario where President Jammeh is asked to step aside and then a transition is formed. But here is the problem. The Gambia has a sunset constitution of the country. The term of office will expire on the 19th of January. If the Constitutional Court doesn't make a determination that implies that the inauguration must be delayed, you will have a constitutional crisis because Jammeh himself will need to be sworn in again, which he won't be able to do. And you will need the judges.
So that date is really hanging in the air there. Something has got to be sorted out.
Something has to be done before that date.
James, isn't the history here telling us an interesting lesson? Because President Jammeh came to power criticising former leaders for hanging on for power for too long. I mean, how ironic is that when he seems to be doing exactly the same thing himself? Well,
with Jammeh, you can expect the worst all the time. This is the same guy who came to power claiming that the PPP government that he overthrew was overstayed their welcome. But also they were involved in major corruption and embezzlement of public funds. Now, we have come around 22 years later to find out that Jammeh is trying to do exactly what he thought he was fighting against in the first instance. So where do we stand with Jammeh? Over the period, most of what he did was unconventional. In fact, most of what Jammeh did was unconstitutional. The very fact that his mandate expires on the 19th, by the very mere operation of the law and the Constitution, his term expires, and therefore the term of the president-elect must, as a matter of law and fact, be inaugurated on the 19th. Well, the whole thing about the Supreme Court is still out there. Nobody, quite frankly, knows how it will pan out. But the reality is that the Gambians do not have the appetite anymore to tolerate Yahya Jammeh in power after 22 years of tyranny. That's a fact. You go around the country, every day people are coming from all sectors of the country, from upriver to the urban areas, pledging and repledging their allegiance to the president-elect. That is a clear indication.
But is it also the case that people are maybe unaware of a movement, that we probably, sitting in the United Kingdom, are probably more aware of an overall picture because there's so much control of media, until perhaps these internet radio stations and internet newspapers are now able to be read by some Gambians if they want to?
Gambia is not a big country. There are networks of communicating, communities communicate with one another. So this is exactly what happens on the ground. People know exactly what is going on. But there is a problem. And this is part of an African problem. And I'm trying here to give insight into what the ECOWAS leadership that are meeting in Abuja under the guidance of Mohamed Buhari, the president of Nigeria, including Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Ghana. The understanding is there's only 14,000 votes in it. That is the difference. So when you look at solving this problem, you are not saying this was a whitewash. An overwhelming majority of people voting for Barrow. Jammeh also has a constituency. So that is 14,000 votes in it. So when they consider these issues and put them at the table, they will be thinking that there are two constituencies that they have to balance. Even if one won the election, they are not just going to brush everything aside because they want to avoid a scenario where there is conflict going forward. So the effort from them will be to say to the Gambian people, the election is over, there is a crisis, but everyone needs to come together. It doesn't matter which political side you were supporting.
James,
before.
is some kind of government of national unity a possibility here, or does Barrow have to take power?
I don't think the Gambians will tolerate any kind of power sharing with Jammeh anymore. And that's because we have a history of tyranny and dictatorship under Jammeh, and Gambians don't have the appetite for that, like I said earlier. The fact is, the difference in the votes is not 14,000, it's 18,000, just under 19,000, frankly. And the fact is, when Jammeh conceded on the 2nd of December, he actually referred to the exact number for which Barrow won, which he referred to on TV, 18,000 votes. But then he went ahead to say that Gambia's election process and the system of election, the marble system, is unriggable. He said that clearly and referred to the exact number of votes by which Adama Barrow won, 18,000. Okay. So if after a week he should come back and say, no, this system that I said was rig-proof has now spun us these results.
And this is why we're in the problem we are today.
This is why we're in the problem. It's also come back
to this story, I think, in the coming days as we see how it plays out. Thank you both very much indeed. We end our programme with the Insight Bite. This is a little something that we feel you should know. And today, an anniversary. It's 10 years since the then Apple CEO Steve Jobs unveiled the first iPhone. It was a mobile phone with music and the internet all in one. It made Apple the world's most valuable company. Initially, it was hailed as an iPod, a music player with added phone functions. Nowadays, it's used mostly as a mobile computer. But after a decade, has the trendy trailblazer lost its touch? Last year, sales dipped for the first time, and the company caused a stir with the release of its iPhone 7, which lacked the popular 3.5mm headphone jack. Competition is fierce. Tech giants like Google, Microsoft and Samsung launching ever more popular devices. It remains to be seen if the iconic Apple iPhone can stand the test of time or if it'll be overtaken by one of its many rivals. And that's all for now. I'm Martin Stanford. That was Insight.